Hi folks, just a quick update on what's happening here in the studio. As we can see over here, we've got our, I think it's number 5, painting number 5. I've been trying to knock out one every weekend or maybe finish one in each weekend. Usually what's been happening is I'm getting the underpainting done in the first weekend, and then I'm usually getting on to the overpainting in the second. So I've been doing underpaintings in monochrome. I think the French term is grisaille, which is a black and white tonal underpainting. And then I normally put a glaze over the top just to give it a little bit of colour. And then I work impasto, usually alla prima, like in one sitting, sometimes a couple of sittings. And this one's a little bit different to the other ones. The first two I did were very quite flat. The paint was quite flat. This one's a lot more impasto. There's a lot more surface to it. I don't know if you can see it in ranking light, but there's a lot more, especially on the goose. The feathers are actually quite raised, and called this one Gogh's Goose because I don't know why the colours seem to remind me a little bit of Van Gogh. Unfortunately, it's unlikely to sell for several trillion billion dollars. And yep, over the background there, we've got our diptych of our two previous paintings that we did of the rooster and the hen. So yeah, it's going well. And I might just show you. I just went to Eckersley to get some goodies, so I might just do a quick unbagging and show you what I got there and why I've got it as well. Yep, you know, a few little things that I found out today online. Things that I kind of already knew, but it was a little bit of a reminder. Anyway, we'll get back to you shortly. Okay, so I'll just get those out of the way. These are the paints I got last time. They're acrylic, black and white. It's a Reeves acrylic, and I'm using that for doing the acrylic grisaille black and white tonal underpainting. You can click on the link that I'll put on here to show you that process. What have we got here? What I ended up getting was I got a little bit of ivory black, Art Spectrum ivory black, and the reason why I got that was because I'm thinking about eventually doing some portraits, and the next painting I'm going to be doing is a black horse. And although you can mix a black using all the colours that I'm presently using on my palette, it's a very difficult thing to do. So out of that bag, yeah, $150 worth of stuff, some gold gouache. The goose painting, I actually want to do the edges of the board that it's painting on in gold. Just thought that would be a nice finishing touch rather than a grubby sort of, you know, paint that's smeared over the sides. And these paints that I got are actually, apart from the mixing white, which I just needed more of, because your white you always use more of than any other colour, more often than not, unless you're really glazing layer by layer. You use a lot of white. This is what's known as a Renaissance palette. I'll just get the camera over here. Although this should be actually a cadmium red light. They didn't have cadmium red light, so I'm going to see how I go with that. But you'd normally have a cadmium red light, yellow ochre, titanium white, and ivory black. And believe it or not, that palette is known as the Renaissance palette. I'll just put the camera up here. And the reason why it's a Renaissance palette is because you can mix just about any colour using those colours, believe it or not. So there's a link I'll put on the screen to a lady who does a fantastic tutorial on this from the Klein Art Academy in the United States. And I'm sure there's lots of other resources online as well. But basically, back in the day, blue was a very, very expensive colour. Blues and purples were hideously expensive. You needed, I think, lapis lazuli was one of the blue pigments that people used to use, and it was more expensive than gold. You could only get it in Afghanistan. Of course, now it's commercially produced, and blue is no big deal anymore. But one of the benefits of this limited palette, of course, is that it gives you better control of your colours because you're less likely to get lost in the mixing process. And I know you might be saying, well, how do I mix a blue? Believe it or not, and you'll see it if you click on the link that's on this video, when you mix your ivory black with white, you actually get a bluey grey tone. So you can actually create blues, and obviously yellows come from the yellow ochre. And what this palette is really, really good for is also doing skin tones if you're doing a portrait. And that's probably the next challenge that I'm going to set myself at some point in time when I'm getting tired of painting animals. I'm going to have a crack at doing some skin tones and doing a portrait. So that should be really, really amusing because, you know, if you want to show how incompetent you are as a painter, I think that's one of the best ways to do it, to try and do a portrait. Anyway, hope that's been of some use to somebody. I'm doing this more as a way of keeping a record of my painting progress and inviting people in the studio to see how the process happens. You know, some people don't like to demystify their art making. They like to sort of create a bit of an aura or a myth about it. I think the whole process is a mystery to me anyway. Most of the time I start, I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what colours I'm going to use, and it's kind of like a conversation you have with the artwork that goes backwards and forwards. And then you end up with a masterpiece or a disaster. Anyway, I'm having fun doing this, and I think if you're thinking of, you know, painting, if you're watching videos on how to paint, that's a great way of learning how to paint, but the best way is, of course, pick up a brush and get the brush mileage happening because you're not going to get better by just watching videos. Case in point for that, I've watched, you know, thousands of hours of stuff that, you know, online of people working, and the only way to really get your head about it is to give it a go. So I'm back in the studio after 6 years, really enjoying the process and trying to crank out as much work as possible. Anyway, enough from me. Any comments, any questions, you know, downstairs, I might be able to answer them. But yeah, happy painting. Bye.